Welcome to the latest edition of All's Caps. I'm AP hockey writer Steve Wino with former Capitals defenseman Karl Alzner, and joined by, from the Carolina Hurricanes and Daily Faceoff, former ESPN, former Athletic, and my fantasy football partner, Scott Burnside. Scott, good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me aboard. I'm honored that you have time for me.
I always have time for you, and I'm glad Karl can make time for you. And our next guest later this week is Denis Kudla, a tennis player. So he will have a hard act to follow from this episode.
Absolutely, Scott. I'm so happy that you're on. I think anyone who's read some of the stuff you do realizes how good you are at just like really diving in, and it's an art. It really is an art what you do, and it's hard to get guys to give you the info that they give you sometimes. So I think this is awesome that you're here. And I love that you guys have a pretty close relationship too, that hopefully we can dive into and see some of the rifts, maybe the mismanagement that we have going on between you guys off of paper and more on fantasy.
Well, before we get to, like, I'm sure you know, Steve, but one of the last times I saw Karl in person was in his place in Montreal. And it was one of my favorite trips during my tenure at the Athletic. It was actually, I don't know if you know this, Karl, but during that same trip, I spent some time with Emily Castengay, the agent who's now the assistant GM in Vancouver. So that was a great part of the trip. And then spending time with you at your place. And it was, you were a very good host. I think I was there on a Saturday or Sunday morning, dogs, kids. It was great. And I also actually saw 2 AHL games while I was there. I saw the Rockets play twice, which I believe are the only AHL games I'm trying to think, maybe ever seen. So there you go.
Really? Oh, we brought you down to the minors for a little bit. Thank you for coming down to watch us play.
well, the good news is escrow doesn't count in the minors. That's the good news.
That's
Great
right.
news. Yes, I can thank my my pool in the backyard to that minor league stint right there.
So Karl and I will talk about this, I'm sure, some more as well. But the Capitals stink right now. I'm wondering your thoughts from 30,000 feet here, watching this team. What do you think is wrong, and is there any way to fix it?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, because I think, when you look at the first, I don't know what, third of the season, give or take. I have had this discussion with lots of people, because I look at sometimes the Capitals and the Penguins in the same through the same kind of lens. And I think at the start of the season, to me, the question was, is it possible one or both of these teams will sort of sink beneath the surface, right? I mean, they neither of them had particularly good playoffs in the last 2 or 3 years. Certainly since the Caps won the Cup in 2018, they haven't been very good in the playoffs. The Pens haven't been very good since going back to back in 2016 and 2017. And I wondered if this was the year that one or both would sort of fade. And then the first third of the season or whatever, both of them were so good. And Ovi was off to such an incredible start. And even without Nick Backstrom in the lineup, it just looked like, oh my God, both the Pens and the Caps are going to make it, this last run. And who knows, maybe we'll see them face each other in the playoffs. And, Penguins are still an interesting team for me. And they're everyone in the East is locked into the top 8 spots, right? Yep. No one, with all due respect to Columbus, no one's catching anyone, which is probably a good thing for the Caps, because they probably don't deserve to be in the playoffs given the way they're playing right now. And I know the outside view is, well, your goaltending isn't very good, and if you fix that, then you would fix everything. And I don't know if it's that simple. I
don't think it is anymore. I don't. So I'm at a loss, because I think, I just think that there's so much to like about that team, but maybe the injuries have caught up to them and the rotating lineup. I don't know. And maybe they're a team. What they look like right now? They look like a team that how they played in the playoffs the last couple of years, which was step slow and not really able to compete. So maybe this stretch run turns things around, but I just don't know that there is an obvious fix. What do you guys think? Yeah, Karl, were you at this Leafs game?
Yes, I was.
I mean, that's the one of those games that, like, to me, it felt like they deserved a point.
but not a win in that game. And it just seemed like every time something went wrong, it would snowball. And the late goal being what it was, but everything. Faravari had a rough night. Samsonov is brutal right now. And so whether it's the goaltending situation or the defense, what's the deal here?
What I took away from that game, that was the first game that I've actually been able to like sit and pay attention. Mandy had to ask me if I was all right because I was so focused on just watching the game. But what I took away from that is that Toronto looks really good. They look like it's like the way I was thinking about it yesterday. It's like the best player in beer league. When they want to have a good shift, they control the game. When their top lines want to have a good shift and go, they controlled that game. And it was a relentless forecheck, and the Caps just didn't seem to really have an answer for getting out of their own zone. And so I said this earlier in the year that because they had as many injuries as they did, and they were relying so heavily on that top line, 22, 23, 24 minutes a night, like that is really hard to do as a forward. And I mean, the only thing I can think is that it's catching up and they're getting tired and, not only physically tired, but mentally tired. This is the hump part of the season. And it's hard to be up for these games. And especially when you know that you're still kind of locked into the playoffs here and it's going to be hard for someone to catch you. But yeah, at this point, it just seems like it's not, the blade isn't sharp. Yeah, there's a few things that they're letting slide. And it depends on how long you're going to let it slide. I'm sure the coaching staff's not happy right now because you don't want these bad habits to creep in. But to me, it looks just like it looks like fog. It looks like they're just not sharp right now. And other teams like the Leafs are sharp.
Yeah, and I'll take the doldrums part of the season. And in January, that's where I was chalking this up to, that they're bored. Right now, I'm way past their board and worried about they're old and not a good team anymore. And I'm wondering if Scott, if there's people around the league you're talking to about this who see the same things we're seeing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's that thin line though between, being dismissive of a team with Ovechkin, Backstrom. To me, Tom Wilson's still a terrific top 6 player.
Yeah,
I wrote about Evgeny Kuznetsov and what I think has been an important bounce back year for him. I know he's cooled off like a lot of the players on that team, but I think his play this year has been impressive after what we've seen the last couple of years. John Carlson still plays at a very high level, but and maybe it's less about their high end talent and more about where are those depth pieces? We talk about the Penguins, or you mentioned I provide content for the Hurricanes, and so I see a lot of Carolina play, and I think about and the Leafs are a little bit like this, but certainly Carolina rolling 4 lines. They've got young players who come in and make contributions. When they're healthy, there's a fierce fight for ice time and playing time in Carolina. And I'm not sure that there's where is that with this Capitals team? And I think we've seen flashes of it, and I don't know. And again, I don't know what happens between now and the last week of April, and I think the playoffs start, whatever it is, May 1st or 2nd, whatever the date is, that what will change for this team other than you have a group of players who have gone that path and have won it all. But it seems like a long time ago that happened.
Yeah, and Anthony Mantha will be back. I mean, after the shoulder thing, I mean, whether he's got Kucherov or not, he'll be back as well.
Yeah. Well, then it's an important, right?
It's
an
an
important part
addition,
of that second line, and you've been missing that all year. Although, I don't know, I still don't know. I'm just waiting to see, what he brings to justify what went out in that deal.
And we're sitting here now less than 3 weeks away from the trade deadline, and Karl and I have talked ad nauseum about a goal, like adding a goalie. But at this point, guys, I think there's more necessary here. I don't know if that's a Nick Holden on defense, somebody who can play a kind of third line winger role. I don't know if you could afford a Phil Kessel, but I think at this point, Brian McClellan either has to burn up the phone lines and make a call or say, this is the team that we're going to the playoffs with, and that's it.
Yeah, it makes sense too, because at the beginning of the year, we were talking, on and on about Ovi, Kuzi, and how they were going, but we were also talking about the fourth line, the Hagelin, Dowd, Hathaway line, and they were also contributing what seemed like every single night. And so, they're on the sheet, they're the fourth line, but they were playing, almost like a second line role in terms of output on the ice. And so if they're not doing that, then you have that gap that seems to be a little bit more glaring right now. So it's kind of seems like you need to inject some sort of, energy somehow into the lineup and see who's out there and see what kind of price you have to pay, because we've been talking about the window for the last 5 years, and so why not continue talking about the window and find a way to get something out of these guys.
But I'm with you, Karl. I like the window is real, right? I mean, and we saw what Pittsburgh has done basically since Crosby came in the league, which is to buy. And, it's, I talked to Ron Hextall for a piece on Jeff Carter a couple of weeks ago. And, I don't see the Penguins doing anything sort of dramatic because they really don't have, space to do it. But maybe this is, well, let me ask you, is this the time you've got draft picks if you want to move them? Is this the time and whether it's, I don't know whether Ben Sherrod or whether whoever it is to help shore up the blue line, and maybe it's 2 or 3 pieces. I know there's always a danger at the deadline if you're trying to integrate 2 or 3 pieces, but is this the time to say, listen, we're running out of runway here. Ovechkin is having a career that defies his age. Let's sell. It's only a first round pick. It's only a second. Do what you need to do to bring in. If it takes 2 or 3 pieces, I guess for me the critical question is if you bring in 2 or 3 pieces and one of them's not a goaltender, because I think that's a whole other discussion.
It is.
Do you solve enough of your problems to have a successful run? Because right now you're going to play probably Carolina in the first round, or it doesn't matter how you cut it, you're going to play the top seed. So if it's not Carolina, it's going to be Tampa or it's going to be Florida. And what are there additions that you can make as the Washington Capitals that give you a chance to beat any of those teams? Toronto too, I suppose.
Right. So that's this is where it's like the business sense has to come in with the GM and the ownership and stuff. Like, do you think, is there someone out there that you can add to this team to be better than Florida, to be better than Carolina, Tampa? If yes, then okay, yeah, go ahead and try it because your window is there. If not, it's like you kind of almost have to bite the bullet and say we're going to waste this great season that some of these players are having in order to hopefully load up in the next year or two, and then maybe they have another great season. That's the hard decision to make right now, because at this point, at least the hockey that we're seeing right now, I don't think adding one player is enough to get them into the category that those top teams are at. So, I mean, that's a hard decision to make.
And the good news is it's not our decision to make. That is Brian McClellan's problem. I have recovered from Beijing, from a trip to Nashville, still awaiting my next trip to Raleigh to hang out with my good friend Scott. And it actually really has been a rewarding part of you getting this job with Carolina, Scotty, that I'm a 4-hour drive from Raleigh, and we've been able to have some very good times watching some hockey, watching some football there. I was able to do some work on the book there, but it's really been a pleasure to be able to hang out with you there where your son is going to school at NC State.
Yeah, well, yes. I only wish that we had better news to report on the fantasy football front. And I don't know whether it's because we were actually had emergency management meetings at a number of locations in Raleigh over the course of the football season. But as you and I were talking with Karl before we started to record, I'm going to take 85 to 89% of the responsibility for mismanaging the 2 teams that we're partners in out of contention. So I'm going to own that.
And we did. I thought we made some good trades, and we still overmanaged it. I think your boy JP Barry did fleece us on a trade at one point, Karl. We just absolutely got murdered on some of these moves. But there's always next year, because we might as well be hanging out for the draft because we have no picks until like the 19th round.
That's right. That's true.
So how does that work with you guys? Is one of you more into making the trades than the other, or more like setting the lineup? Or are you guys fully equal on that? How does that work?
Well, Scott cracks the whip on all of those things. He's the one driving the bus, and I'm saying yes or no.
Well, it's because I don't have a full-time job, Carl. I have lots of time to pour over the waiver wires, and it's so I feel that I may, and I don't have a lot of patience. So now, listen, you know what the great thing is, though, is that it has given Steve and I a chance. We talk every day during football season. I will bug him, while he's doing work at Caps skates or whatever. And no, and we did make the playoffs in both leagues, finished first in the regular season. I will say the absolute worst part, though, is that in the one pool, it's run by our good friend Pierre Lebrun, who mocked us mercilessly during the regular season for we were like one of the lowest scoring teams, and we seemed to win every game like 40-30. So by the time the playoffs came in, he was mocking us for being the undeserved number one seed. And of course, we did get crushed, I believe, by Chris Johnson in the first round. So that was the worst part.
We were exactly as overrated as he said.
Yeah, there's always a team like that, though, that you just look and you're pissed because you've got like 1,500 points scored against you and they have like 800. And it's just so frustrating how it always lines up that way. But that's all good. I mean, you know what? So Scott, when you were out visiting me, that was the year that I probably had my best showing ever in fantasy football, because I was driving so much from my place to Laval that I was on the fantasy football radio all day. Like I was spending 3 or 4 hours listening to these guys. So I knew everything. I was on every waiver wire pickup. I was solid. And it came down, I made it all the way to the finals, came down to me needing, I think it was 3 points from my kicker. And he ended up getting 2 1/4, I think. And so I ended up losing the final to Brendan Gallagher. And I was pissed because, the pools that the guys have on those teams they're fairly high stakes. And I had already told the guys in Laval, I'm like, if I win this, I'm buying a night out, this and that. And then sure enough, I lost by 3/4 of a point. So the more time you can spend on it, it actually works. Like you can't.
Not for Scott, it doesn't. It doesn't work.
No.
The more time Scott works on it, the worse it gets.
I guess you can do that.
No, but Carl, I'm curious because I think it's probably the same in most locker rooms. But what's that dynamic like? I wonder if it's the same as like the pools that we're talking about are basically they're hockey writers or sports writers or people who are sort of connected pretty closely one way or the other, and it's pretty like I'd like to win, and sure, it would have been nice to win the money. Honestly, I just wanted to beat Pierre. I just wanted that. And is it the same in with your teammates, or maybe I assume you are still probably involved, and like is that part of it? Not just winning, but being better than the guy sitting next to you.
There's always like 1 or 2 people that you just have to beat, like for me, it was Brendan Gallagher. For everybody, it was Brendan Gallagher. Everyone had to beat him. You didn't want to lose to him. So that was the way that worked. And then for me here in DC, it was Carly. I had to beat Carly. And so, but that's the reason why I even got into fantasy football in the first place, was just because there was the conversation at the rink every single day, like nonstop. Yep. This is happening. Talk about this guy. And I'm like, if I want to be involved in this conversation, like I need to get into it. So that's how it happened. And now I'm in a pool with like, the cool thing is, this is my first ever time running a pool this year. And we had just the funnest mix of people, like some of my good buddies from back home, a couple guys from here that were local, Dennis, who will come on here, who's a tennis player. We had a musician, a singer that was on there. It was just like a weird mix of people, but it ended up being so fun because like everybody takes being chirped a lot differently. And some people like to dish it out a little bit more than others. And so I don't know, I just thought it was really fun, and everybody can still agree on one thing, that it's a fun game to play for all of us.
Back in the day, and this might have been 5 or 6 years ago, Scotty and I owned a hockey team together. And I remember we lost on the final day of the season on a Jamie Benn hooking penalty that I will never forgive to this day, that we lost on a stupid, I don't even know who the ref was that day, but I cannot forgive him for that.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I just opened up my hockey pool this morning and realized I started Jonathan Quick last night in there. I was at 7-0 loss. So I'm starting this week at -10 points, and my run of 5 wins in a row is probably going to come to an end. So, fantasy sports for you. It's the way it works sometimes.
Yeah,
I am the worst fantasy hockey manager on earth. I'm on like year 6 of my rebuild here. It's like I was going for it and winning, and all of a sudden every goalie decision went wrong. Ilya Sorokin can't play. Everything. I went all in on the Islanders and the Flyers, and that didn't work out so well for me. And now I'm in a rebuild. Scott and I just made a trade the other day in that league, which is another, I wouldn't say high stakes, but medium stakes hockey pool that we're involved in.
Sounds like a good time. Well, I mean, okay, so we're talking about fantasy a little bit, but there's something that's not fantasy that I really want to talk about and help us learn a little bit more about you, Scott, is please tell us about this true crime business, because I am a huge, anything that's real, like any sort of documentary, any biography, that's all I'm looking for, like when I'm on Netflix or whatever it is. And so, explain to me how that works for you. How do you get into something like that? And explain to everybody listening kind of your path to where you are now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. It feels in many ways like it happened to somebody else. It was a long time ago, but before I became a sports guy, I was a news guy. I worked at the Toronto Sun, and early in my tenure there, I ended up working on a story with a fellow reporter about the disappearance of 2 young girls in the Niagara region, and it turned out to be a husband and wife team, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, who had kidnapped and held captive and sexually tortured and ultimately murdered 2 teenage girls, and were also involved in the death of Carla Homolka's younger sister. And it turned out that Paul Bernardo was also a serial rapist. He raped, I believe, 19 mostly young women in the Scarborough, University of Toronto area of Toronto. And so I covered this case for a long time, wrote a book with my partner, Alan Cairns, who passed away 2 years ago, actually. So covered that. It was a big trial in Canada. It came at a time when the internet was still basically in its infancy, and there were publication bans and all kinds of crazy things that surrounded this case. And recently I was contacted by a documentary crew who did a 4-part documentary series on the case and its implications, and some of the important things that happened as a result of the case. And so I was interviewed for that, and it's out on Discovery Plus. And every once in a while I'll hear from somebody in my hockey world who's been watching or happens to see me on this documentary. But it is, it's amazing that people are still interested in it. It's a long time ago, but it's also, was part of my career early on. And at the end of the trial I made the transition from news to sports. I needed a change and basically started covering mostly hockey, but sports in general, but covering hockey for the most part, right after the end of that trial. So it marked a transition in my life in terms of, my coverage and what I spent my time doing. I tell you, it's a lot easier to cover hockey than a case like that. That's for sure.
Yeah, and our friend Katie Brown messaged me at some point in December or January saying, "I'm just minding my own business, watching this documentary," and she sends me the screen cap of your face, Scotty. I was like, so I had to watch this, and there is footage of young Scott Burnside from that time. The Ken and Barbie Killers on Discovery Plus. Karl, if you haven't seen this yet, you need to check this out.
I will be checking that out. I mean, I couldn't imagine that after going through that and probably getting some of those details, you probably just want to, decompress and think of something else. So I can understand wanting to transition out of that. It's an interesting transition to get into hockey, I guess. But at the same time, I wonder, because one of the things that's so cool about talking to you and reading the stuff that you do is you make the person that you're interviewing just comfortable. It turns into a conversation like ours was at my dinner table, in the house. Just, it wasn't, it didn't feel like there was anything being recorded, just a casual conversation. And I'm curious if, like how you've built up those techniques. Like, how do you allow people to, let down their guard to just talk to you? Because I read your article with Kuzi. Like, Kuzi's a great person to talk to, but it seemed like it was you talking with him, like just at a bar, hanging out. And do you have techniques for that? How do you get people into that space?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there are techniques necessarily. And I think part of it is, maybe when you do it for a long time and you have a, like
Right.
Evgeny and I had spoken, I'd written about him in the past. I knew what he'd been through and how he grew up, and we'd had those conversations. And I think maybe it's too simplistic, but honestly, like if I'm doing a story that I'm interested in, like I'm a fan in some ways. So I ask the questions that I would ask if I was sitting at a bar, and this if you and I were sitting at a bar or over a coffee talking about, well, what happened? What's it like to play for the Rocket? What, all of those things. I'm interested in that. And so I approach it that way, I think. And I don't, and I think when I think about, okay, what kind of stories can I do? Who should I, what would be interesting? I do try and think of, well, what would I want to read about? What's interesting to me? I spent a long time chatting with Ethan Bear from the Carolina Hurricanes for a piece that ran on the Carolina website and NHL.com. And I didn't know Ethan at all. And I wasn't sure. I just wasn't sure, he's, a younger player. He's had some terrible things happen to him at the end in Edmonton with the racial commentary. And some people, not every conversation turns out to be the way you want. I'll divert here. I talked to Jesse Puljujarvi earlier in the season. I swear it lasted 10 minutes. And it was like, that was the worst interview I've ever done.
I was wondering that if that happens.
It was like, he was like, I don't know what he was doing. He wanted no part of me.
Just closed off.
It was like, and that's fine. But I found Ethan Bear, I was so interested in what he had to say. And he was so eloquent, and he talked so passionately about, bringing the Seattle Thunderbirds to his tiny reserve in Saskatchewan. And like, I felt like I was there. And it's, it's not me. It's if you're lucky, if you're talking to somebody like Karl Alsner or Ethan Bear or Evgeny Kuznetsov, who feels comfortable telling you a story or sharing their experiences, that's not me necessarily. So I take credit for it, but I think that's what it is. So, I like to think I'm genuinely interested in, and then it does just turn into a conversation. Oh, what was that like? How'd that happen? Or what did you do? What did you think? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. But you mean there's so much of it is about the delivery too. Like, I've been asked questions before from people where I'm just like, I get a bad vibe. I'm like, this is not going to go.
Karl, I'm sitting right here.
Yeah, always from Lino. But you know what I mean? No, it's like I just feel like this person's trying to get at something that I don't really. It's not the path I want to go down, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to be a good thing. But I mean, so there's definitely an art in the delivery and how you word it, and the people you talk to. Like that was the other thing too. I was curious. Like, do you try and structure the interview around someone? So say Kuzi, you talk to Mac and you talk to Laviolette. Do you like to talk to them first and then go to Kuzi, or do you like to talk to Kuzi first and then go to those guys, or does it matter? Whoever's just available.
Yeah, mostly it's whoever is available. And sometimes if you talk to somebody, there may be, like I talked to Ethan Bear for a long time, and then I went back to trying to, talk to his, people he knew in Seattle, people from his reserve. I talked to he was great. He put me in touch with his fiance. It took us a long time to connect. And I think she was quite nervous because that's not part of her world. So it took us a long time to connect, but she was really outstanding talking about their relationship, and specifically when the racial taunts came at the end of that playoff series against Winnipeg a year ago. So sometimes it's just, but I do think, every story is different, but I do think it's important as much as possible to find, the outside voices and who can, help to explain I'm trying to think of who I talked to for the piece I wrote about you. I will say, and again, I go down my own rabbit hole here. One of my favorite parts of your story, you were talking about playing against Andrew Ladd, and you were both standing in the corner late in one game, and basically it was late, and I think the score was not in question, and so you were sort of chatting, and I think your wife and your kids were there, and you're like, Andrew, that's my wife and my kids, and I think he gave him the wave. I just thought that was a great thing. And Andrew was on a podcast with Mike McKenna and I that we do for Daily Faceoff, and great for him to get back with Arizona. And we talked about he and his wife have a foundation now for kids, but I just love that part of that story, and it made me. I just sort of tucked it away. I was like, well, that's a perfect image. It was great. So.
Yeah, I think you need to show like the human side of the athlete a lot of times too. Because that's sometimes that gets overlooked. Maybe same thing with Ethan Bear. Like people don't realize this is not just a hockey player. This is someone who's going to go home and think about everything you've just told him and yelled at him and wrote about him. And so it's nice to just just show that although that we're battling in this glass, in between the glass and the boards here, that's still a person. It's not just someone who's on tracks that just goes through these motions. So I guess that it just brings more light to the individual.
Yeah, that's one of the things, and I've told you this, Karl, that I appreciate about you is how not robotic you were in talking to us about things that maybe other players would be afraid to say how they're actually feeling, and it got you in trouble at times. But to be honest about how you actually feel, I think is a looking glass to writers and to readers about kind of the humanity of all this.
Well, yeah, too, because we all have different opinions on how things are going, right? Like a coach may see something one way, and that's the way they see it. And then a defenseman may see it differently than the coach, which sees it different than the forward, and so I'm just trying to give my point of view as a defenseman, as someone who takes things a certain way. And then, you write.
Eventually, I think Karl's going to have to ask me these stupid questions at some point too. But for now, Scott Burnside is the latest victim of Karl's stupid questions.
Yes, I've been waiting a while. One of these days, and I want the perfect questions for you. So I've been slowly marking down which ones I think you'd be good at. But yeah, so Scott, so these are just quickly. It's just dumb questions that I've thought of. My buddies have thought of, and I just try and ask them and get a little bit better picture of who you are and how you like to answer things. So it's my turn on this side of the paper now.
All right.
And I'm going to give you a score at the end too, just so
okay.
you know. So score high or score low, it's up to you. First question is, we obviously know you're a great writer, great storyteller, but what job would you be bad at, you think? Like, what would you just not have a good time doing at all?
Well, pretty much anything else. But anything involving measuring, a hammer, sawing, numbers, banking, manual labor. I think that covers pretty much so I sometimes say this, that I am in fact ill qualified to do anything else. So that's the sad truth.
That's amazing.
I think you'd be bad at anything that requires a vow of silence. Anything that would require that, you'd be bad at.
That too. Also, any job where you can't swear.
Gotcha. Okay, so librarian would not be good, even though you do like books, right?
Minister or something like that. Yeah.
Too good. Okay, good answer. Okay, next one here. Do you have a guilty pleasure? Something that, for me, it's definitely sweets. It'd be my guilty pleasure. Do you have anything along those lines?
Yeah. You know what? I really dill pickle chips, and thanks to Amazon, I've been able to buy them literally by the box full, which probably not great for a hockey writer who has more or less sedentary lifestyle, but dill pickle chips. And I'll be honest, I sometimes buy them late at night. I think I probably bought them with wino late at night.
You have bought dill pickles. We have walked into a 7-Eleven and you've walked out with dill pickle chips. This has happened. I believe in Chicago.
Yes.
Do you go with like the small individual size bag, or you need the big one?
Big ones.
Big one, take it down.
Although I will say, on Amazon, you have to be careful, because if you aren't careful, you will get a box full of the tiny ones. Ooh. And that seems wasteful to me. So I prefer when the box comes and they have the big bags.
Well, what makes you feel better though, having one big bag of dill pickle chips or 3 of the small bags? Because it's like Halloween, you know, I can justify 10 little mini chocolate bars, but if you give me 2 full-size chocolate bars, I feel something's wrong.
I hear you. No, I understand that. I think it's for me, it's the wasteful packaging. And plus, I can always clip the big bag, put it away, and then come back and have some later.
Gotcha. Good for you for clipping it, not letting them dry out.
And you do not have a sedentary lifestyle. Your routine, your kind of walking and jump rope routine fascinates the hell out of me.
Well, I do. You got to do something. But it's true. Every day, I go for a walk. I walk the same route. I have a jump rope. I jump rope. In fact, my wife and I talk about this sometimes now. I've been doing it so long here in Decatur, Georgia, that people stop, speak to me. There is a Forrest Gump element to it. And it's true. And I made the wino go on several long walks in Raleigh around the hotel, which is actually around the lake, which is when I learned, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, where I learned that Steve Wino can't swim. So there you go.
Really?
I cannot swim. Neither of my parents knew how to swim. By the time they threw me into a pool, it wasn't going to work. But all I was worried about that day was not falling into the lake. The walk itself was great. We were in a wooded area, and we kind of just wandered around. It was a good cleansing morning before 8 hours of drinking and watching football, as long as I didn't fall into the lake.
Oh, this is a lot to digest here. We have a non-swimmer and then a jump rope champion. This is very interesting stuff. Do you jump to music? Like, I've seen these videos of people like just dance jump roping, and it looks intense.
Yeah. No, I don't take my phone with me, and I don't have any kind of ear plugs or anything like that. No, it's just me in nature.
Wow, I love that. Good points, even though it was a question about dill pickle chips. Still get plus points. Okay, so that's actually interesting because you are in Carolina. There's a lot of great players there to watch. But do you have a favorite player? Someone you just either love the way they play, or someone you've talked to that you like even more because of that, or anyone that just kind of gravitate towards?
I like anyone who's nice to me and can remember my name. So, but no, I'm sure Steve feels the same way. Well, in fact, once again, I will control this dialogue, and we won't go into it, but we have part of sometimes when we are discussing, if it's just Steve and I or a group of us, a group of hockey writers, we will have, players that I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to find players that we find disagreeable or hard to deal with or work with than it is players who are, open and are willing to spend time and share things. Listen, it's a cliche, but the vast majority of hockey players and people in the game are exceptional to deal with. That's the reality. So, but sometimes we do talk about that very tiny group that aren't. But to answer your question, I don't know if there are, there probably aren't favorites. I mean, there are people that I've run into now because I've been doing it a long time. Like, I always love to run into Matt Cullen, and Matt Cullen was I just always enjoyed my conversations. We used to have this joke that he could not retire, because if he did, it meant that we were both really old. And of course, he almost never retired. And I saw him; he was on the bench with the Penguins the other night, filling in for Todd Reardon. So, but no, there have been a lot. There are a lot, and I feel fortunate. When I go to a game or an event, and you run into, whether it's a current player or even somebody that, I'll tell you how old I am. When I very first started in sports, so I did the Bernardo thing, and my first sports job was a columnist at the Windsor Star in Windsor, Ontario, and the captain of the Windsor Spitfires was DJ Smith. So whenever I run into DJ Smith now, I'm like, man, that's a long time ago. And I think he's doing a great job in that Ottawa situation. So anyway, I wish I could, if I thought about it, I could probably come up with, I spent a lot of time around Sidney Crosby over the years, and Sidney has always been exceptionally graceful with his time. And I covered his Cup days in 2009. I was in the Stanley Cup parade in Cole Harbor with some photographers right behind Granny and Grandpa.
Nice.
So and he was kind enough. I was out at his lake house. We had the cup, and he was getting. I didn't stay for the Great Big Sea concert, which was at his house, but I've always enjoyed my conversations with him because he's an incredibly thoughtful, smart guy. So
Yeah, I mean there's been a list of people who have said good things about Sidney Crosby, and it's hard for us Capitals fans to enjoy hearing that, but I guess he's a good guy, so we'll go with that. This one is tough now because you answered about your guilty pleasure being dill pickle chips, but I know that at the at games and stuff, there's some different options for food in the media lounge and in the press box and stuff. Is there something that you always have to get? Like I always love the what is it, like a bits and bites mix, with like the pretzels and crackers and stuff. Is there something that it's like, all right, let me get my seat, let me grab my cup full of whatever it is, or a Diet Coke, whatever. Do you have something like that?
yeah, I'm partial to dry roasted peanuts. You don't find them everywhere, but I like those. One of the things I've found over the years in press boxes, and I don't know whether Steve will corroborate this or not, there are very few press boxes with good coffee, and I don't know why. Why does that happen?
And there are particularly bad arenas for coffee. And I don't want the people at Scotiabank and Arena in Toronto to get mad at me, but that is some of the worst rink coffee you could possibly find. They say it's
Dallas.
Tim Hortons. It's not Tim Hortons.
Yeah. Dallas, I spent a year working for the Stars and, love those guys, but man, the coffee it's garbage. And that's the thing. And it's hard to find. It's just hard to find good coffee in a press box. And you would wonder why that would be so. But, and I try, Toronto, I covered the Leafs for a couple of years. They have ice cream bars. And it was during a period in my life when, I was not jumping rope. So ice cream bars, I try not to eat them too much. So, but that was a good thing in Toronto, the ice cream bars.
And that's actually a favorite memory of mine from working at Canadian Press in Toronto, was eating those ice cream bars with like the legends of hockey writing and Eric DeHotchik and Pierre and whatever during like Hockey Night in Canada and watching like Don Cherry and watching the insiders on the TV in the press box there. And that's how I associate those ice cream sandwiches.
Yeah. So it's a great question though. So Karl, I don't know if you had occasion to be in the press box in Montreal, but if you are, well, I'm not being facetious, but I don't know how often you were up in there, but did the players get the pressed hot dogs in Montreal? That's it. For all hockey writers, that's the king of press box snacks, those pressed hot dogs in Montreal. Ooh.
Well, I know I'll let you take this.
Our regular listeners know that this is the official podcast of the Bell Center hot dog.
Yeah, it seems to always come up, these hot dogs. It's like, honestly, they should give us a share in that hot dog company, or whoever's making them, because we've been pumping them up. They're just something you have to have. It's not like, to me, it doesn't feel like such a commitment. It's like a tiny little hot dog. So it's like easy. It's like those little mini chocolate bars. Yeah. It's just like, yep, I'll have one of these. Gone.
And you can't really, let's be honest, you can't just have one, right? Like
exactly. They come in pairs.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, and what I just realized just now is the draft is in Montreal at Bell Center in July. And I couldn't think of the next time we'd be able to have those hot dogs. And now there's an occasion for that.
You guys got to go live. You guys have to go live from Montreal.
That'd be kind of interesting, actually. We'll look into that. Except I won't be having any hot dogs. I'm off the hot dog train, but I'll definitely smell them. They smell good. So, so this is perfect that you mentioned that, though, because it leads into my final question, which I saved for select guests, ones that I think might have a good argument for it. But here it goes: is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
Why not?
I don't even think it's I see the debate occasionally on social media. It's not. A hot dog is a hot dog, and I like sandwiches, and a hot dog is not a sandwich. So that's all there is to it.
How do you define what a sandwich is?
Well, I don't even know that, but I know it's not a hot dog.
What's the line about porn? You know it when you see it. I know a sandwich when I see it.
Well, it's like art. That's it. I don't know. I've never heard the porn one, but it's the art. I don't know art, but I know it when I see it. I don't know what a sandwich is, but a hot dog is not a sandwich.
Simple as that. I like it. Don't need to get extra on that one. That's a good answer for me. Okay, let me give you your tally here. Just quickly go back over these. Big Dill Pickle Chip fan as well. So good answer. Handyman. I get that. Nuts, coffee, perfect. Okay, so that's gonna slot you here at 102 points, which is over the 100-point threshold, which is I guess happening more often now because people are wising up to what they need to answer. But you beat Tom Galletti from last weekend, so congratulations on that.
Is there a playoff later?
There's possibly going to be a playoff, yeah. So don't overmanage, don't mismanage your answers. Just let it be, and you'll be fine.
That's good advice because I would start to think about it now. So
Exactly.
And for even with that, even beyond the fantasy football, Scott and I and a few colleagues, Frank Cervalli and Kevin McGrant, we also do a playoff football and playoff hockey pool every year. So it was a pick 'em against the spread for football, but we also draft players and do a whole scoring system bit in hockey playoffs because we're degenerates.
Gotta have fun with it, right? I think that's a good idea.
that's true.
Scott, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to the next time our paths cross in Raleigh or elsewhere.
Okay. Well, I'm so honored to have joined you guys. It's been a ton of fun. Call anytime.
Thanks, Scott.
And we very well might. Thanks everybody for listening on All's Caps. Dennis Kudla coming up later this week for more Karl Stupid questions, some more Capitals talk, and whatever else Karl and I want to get into. Talk to you guys then.